Week 6 is here, and so is the professor. Brought to you by... Week 6 is upon us. A very crucial week for fantasy football. For most of you, you should be well on your way to the playoffs. For some of you that have only won a couple games and are not looking good for the playoffs, it's because you haven't been paying attention. So week 6, school's in session! The first game of the week for week 6 is the Thursday night game, which is the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Tennessee Titans. I like a lot of the players for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and there's one reason why. They're playing against the Tennessee Titans. The Titans have a pretty weak defense. Pretty much any team that plays against them, you're guaranteed that their players are going to score some points. So I really like Ben Roethlisberger. I like Mike Wallace. I like Antonio Brown. Even their tight end, Heath Miller. All those guys should have an above-average game. And look at Rashard Mendenhall. He's back. He looked great last week. I think he'll do well. As far as the Titans, Chris Johnson, who had one great game, then played a tough Minnesota defense last week and got like 8 yards. So he pretty much only got you 1 point. I think he'll do the same against a Pittsburgh defense. He might get you 2 or 3. So he's going to have a below average game. As far as the rest of the Tennessee Titans, they'll be below average as well. And that brings us to the Oakland Raiders at the Atlanta Falcons. Just like the last matchup, there's not too much to like about the Raiders. Really, the only thing I like about the Raiders will be Darren McFadden, and I don't think he'll have a strong game because he's going up against a tough Atlanta defense. And then you do maybe like Denarius Moore if you're desperate, if you have a wide receiver on a bye week, just because they're going to be behind, they're going to have to throw the ball. He might at least get a few grabs, maybe a lucky touchdown in garbage time. On the other side of the ball, you've got Atlanta. I pretty much like their whole team, except for I'm not a huge fan of Michael Turner this week. I think the Raiders' run defense is pretty tough. But as far as Matt Ryan, he's thrown over 13 touchdowns this year. He'll be great. Julio Jones, Roddy White, and Tony Gonzalez leads the team with 39 catches. Start him if you got him. And next, we have the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. On the Chiefs side of the ball, Matt Castle, you don't know if he's going to be playing or not. He got a concussion last week. I don't think he's going to play. If he is, he's going to struggle. Although you do have to start Dwayne Bowe. He does have 3 times more receptions than any other Chiefs receiver. And, of course, Jamal Charles. The guy's got over 500 yards this season and 2 touchdowns. He has been a workhorse on the field. On the Bucs side of the ball, actually against the Chiefs' soft defense, Josh Freeman might have a decent week this week if you're on a bye week or if you actually have him on your bench and you're thinking he may do better than your starter. Vincent Jackson should do pretty good, as well as Doug Martin. And the next matchup that we have in store for you is the Indianapolis... Hold on 1 second. Hello? Jamal, how you doing? Whoa. Whoa. No. I wasn't trying to shortchange you. Oh, okay. All right. I apologize about that. I sure will. I'll let my viewers know. Next Tuesday? Yeah, I can make a barbecue. Bring a dip? Okay. All right. We'll talk to you later. Bye. Jamal Charles, everybody. He actually wanted me to let you know that I shortchanged him a little bit. He actually has over 551 yards on the season. Impressive. Anyways, that brings us back to the Indianapolis Colts at the New York Jets. As far as the Jets side of the ball, I don't like too much. Who's throwing the ball? Sanchez is horrible. When are they going to bring Tim Tebow in? I know you're all asking that same question. Sean Green can't get it going in the run game, and the receivers with injuries and the rest of them, I really just don't like. I mean, on a very, very outside desperate chance, desperate, if you need him, Curley is the only wide receiver for the Jets that I would even take a look at, and that's if you're super desperate. On the other side of the ball, the Colts. Reggie Wayne has a lot to like about him because Andrew Luck looks for him all over the field. Last week had a monster game, and I think he will continue to do so throughout the season. You do have Donald Brown. I think he'll have a slightly above average game. And Andrew Luck, if you need him, he might be out there on your waiver wire. And this week with the bye weeks coming in, your quarterback may be on a bye. You may want him on your team. And that brings us to the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cleveland Browns. As far as the Cleveland Browns, there is not a lot to like except for one thing and one thing only, and that is Trent Richardson, a.k.a. all the Cleveland Browns have. He is going to be good because he's going to get his touches in the passing game, in the running game. He's pretty much all they have. The only other one that you may look, and it's only if you're desperate, is Greg Little, only because they'll probably be behind by about 20 points and they'll be forced to throw the ball by the end. Greg Little may have a slightly above average game. As far as the Bengals, you got to like most of them. And why? They're playing the Cleveland Browns. Look what Eli did to him last week. Andy Dalton should have a great game, even though he had a bad game last week. Ben Jarvis Green Ellis, I think he'll do well. You also have to like the receivers A.J. Green and even Hawkins for the Cincinnati Bengals. Gresham, the tight end, may even get in on the action. And the next matchup we have for you on our agenda is the Detroit Lions at the Philadelphia Eagles. Once again, if you watched last week's game, you saw Michael Vick create turnovers. But if you have him on your team, you'll see he still scored you 10 to 12 points. Is that great? Absolutely not. But it still was a top 15 quarterback. A lot of guys could have done you worse. So if you have him, do you start him against the Lions? Absolutely you do, because the Lions secondary is a little bit beat up. Now I don't know if I really trust any of their receivers. I do like Selleck and I do like McCoy against this banged up Detroit secondary. But on the other hand, for the Lions, you do have to like Stafford. I think Calvin Johnson gets it going this week, and I think Megatron will finally get a couple touchdowns, and I think he'll actually have a little bit of a breakout game. And I think Mikel LaShore finally is going to actually score above average points if you have him as a running back on your team. Pettigrew, on the other hand, he's got 23 catches. He almost has as much as Megatron. You may like him at tight end this week. Next matchup we have is the St. Louis Rams at the Miami Dolphins. If you watched Sam Bradford last week, you may have been as impressed as I was. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be a top 10 guy this week, but with a lot of players on bye weeks and against Miami's defense, you may look to start Bradford. Last week, they upset the undefeated Arizona Cardinals in a pretty tough defense, so I think he'll do all right. Now, on the running side of the game, Steven Jackson, I don't like Darrell Richardson. Steven Jackson's still hurt. He's not 100%. Neither of them, and I repeat, neither of them have even got into the end zone this year. Now, on their receiving game, Danny Amendola's hurt. So you've got to look at Gibbons and Gibson. And neither of those guys could have a little bit of a breakout game. Now, who does it? That's a crapshoot, and that's for you to decide. On the Miami side of the ball, the only one that you got to like is Reggie Bush. Reggie Bush and Reggie Bush. He is 60% of the offense. He'll catch the ball out of the backfield. He's going to run and get some yards. And the Rams' defense is tough, but not tough enough to stop Reggie Bush. And our next matchup is the Dallas Cowboys at the Baltimore Ravens. Are you one of those guys riding that Romo coaster? I know I'm not. Not this week and not against the Baltimore defense. You can't like him. Now, DeMarco Murray, he may do all right, and that's only because they have to establish a run game in order for him to be able to pass. And that's going to mean Miles Austin and Des Bryant both are going to have subpar days. The only way Miles Austin has a great day is if they fall behind to Baltimore and they have to throw to catch up. Other than that, I don't really see any of them doing that well. On the Baltimore side, you got to like Ray Rice. He's going to run. He's going to be a little upset after not doing very well and not getting into the end zone last week. And I think this week against that Cowboys defense, he will do well. Joe Flacco, where was he last week? They didn't even get in the end zone, whether running, whether passing. This week, he will. He's going to find Torrey Smith. He's going to find Anquan Bolden. He might even find each of them. They're all going to have a pretty good game, as well as Dennis Pitta. And our next matchup is the Buffalo Bills at the Arizona Cardinals. On the Buffalo side of the ball, who do you like on that team? Maybe Stevie Johnson. And that's because the Cardinals' defense is good, but their pass defense is not terrific. Other than that, I don't really like too many people on that team. Fred Jackson, C.J. Spiller, both are back. They both got eaten up by the Niners defense last week. And guess what? The Cardinals' run defense is pretty stout as well. I don't really like too many people on that team. The Cardinals, you got to love Larry Fitzgerald, especially against that Bills defense. You saw what the Niners did to him. Guess what? The Cardinals, I think, will be able to do just the same. And I also like Andre Roberts coming out of nowhere. He actually has 20 catches to Larry Fitzgerald's 30. He's not that far behind. He's actually a pretty solid number 2 receiver. Now that Cobb's throwing him the ball, even though he got sacked 8 times last week, I think they're going to get more practice together. They're going to get better and better. And our next matchup we have in store for you is the New England Patriots at the Seattle Seahawks. Now, you saw what the Seahawks defense did to the Packers a couple weeks ago at home in that debacle of a Monday night game. Guess what? The same thing is not going to happen to the Patriots. They spread the ball around way too much. They have been an offensive juggernaut these last couple weeks. Brady's going to do well. Ridley is actually probably the only one to be concerned about against that tough Seahawks run defense. But other than that, Welker, even Brandon Lloyd, Gronkowski, all of them, they're going to get their touches. They're going to get some action. They should all have above average days. On the Seahawks side of the ball, the only one I like is Marshawn Lynch, and just because he's a big part of their offense. Other than that, Sidney Rice, if you're super, super desperate, may have an all right game, and that's only because they will be behind by 20 points and have to throw the ball. And now that brings us to the New York Giants at the San Francisco 49ers. This year in fantasy football, the professor has pretty much one rule. That's don't play anybody when they're playing against that San Francisco 49er defense. They are tough. Eli Manning, he'll probably have a tough game. Ahmad Bradshaw, he had 200 yards last week. Not against the Niners defense. He'll have less than 50. And the only other one on there is Victor Cruz, Hickson, any of those receivers for New York. Victor Cruz is only the one that I would trust, and that's because they're going to target him 10 to 12 times. He'll make some catches. He'll score you some points. Maybe not even above average. He'll score you some points, though. On the Niners side of the ball, Frank Gore is a beast. Michael Crabtree had a huge game last week, and I think he'll actually have another pretty good game this week. And I also like Vernon Davis. And now that brings us to the Minnesota Vikings at the Washington Redskins. RG3 is going to have a tough matchup against the Minnesota Vikings defense, and that's if he plays. Watch the injury reports before the game to make sure that RG3 plays. He may not. He did get a concussion last week. Alfred Morris will have a tough go against the Vikings' tough run defense. I don't like any of the Washington receivers. The only one you may like is Fred Davis. He leads their team with 20 receptions. On the Viking side of the ball, Adrian Peterson's a must-start against the Redskins. He'll run all over them. Percy Harvin's been fantastic these last few weeks. I look for him to continue. And if you're looking for a deep sleeper in a bye league, you look at Jerome Simpson of the Minnesota Vikings, because he'll actually get you some points. Kyle Rudolph at tight end already has 4 touchdowns this year. I think he'll continue to be on fire. And that brings us to the Sunday night game of the Green Bay Packers at the Houston Texans. This should be a very good game. I also think this may very well be a shootout, which means there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game, which means Rodgers, James Jones, Jordy Nelson, and Jermichael Finley will all get some points. Craig Jennings, you got to look at when he's going to come back. If he's not playing, the ball's going to get spread around to those 3 other receivers. Cedric Benson got hurt last week. Looks like he may be out for the season, so you're going to have to replace him. You might look at signing Alex Green off of waivers. He looked okay last week, and he's going to take a big part of that slack that they left behind. The Texans, on the other hand, of course Arian Foster, of course Andre Johnson. Kevin Walters may actually even get in on the action this game, as well as Owen Daniels, because there is going to be a shootout, and they're going to have to spread the ball around. And the Monday night matchup is going to be the Denver Broncos at the San Diego Chargers. This should be a fun one. Between the two of them, Phillip Rivers and Peyton Manning have thrown for 19 touchdowns this season. So guess what? I anticipate this to be a shootout. A good old-fashioned shootout. And that means that Peyton Manning is going to score points, and Phillip Rivers is going to score points. Malcolm Floyd, I think Robert Meacham will get in on the action. Ryan Matthews will score points. Eric Decker, Demaryius Thomas. Even Joel Greason, he's got 3 touchdowns as a tight end position in Denver. He'll score some points. The only one I don't really like out of this whole matchup is Willis McGahee, and that's because the Chargers do have a pretty tough run defense. Unless they can spread the ball around enough, I don't like McGahee that much. The Panthers, Bears, Jaguars, and Saints all have a bye week this week, which brings us to the bye week blitz. So if you need a quarterback to sub in for somebody you have on a bye week, there's a couple people you can find on waivers who may be able to help you out. Someone like Christian Ponder, who's been a top 10 quarterback 2 out of the last 3 weeks. Someone like Kerry Cobb, who had a rough go last week, but I think this week will have a much better game. And also Andrew Luck. He's still available in a lot of leagues, and he actually looked pretty spectacular these last 2 weeks, last week beating Green Bay. I think he'll have another strong game. On the running back side, Cedric Benson is out. You may have him. You may have a running back on a bye. Look to sign Alex Green out of waivers. He's going to be the one taking over the carries in Green Bay. At wide receiver, look at Andre Roberts and the Cardinals. I think Kerry Cobb's going to have a much, much better game, and I look for Roberts to have a big game as well. Nate Washington of the Titans, and that's a tricky one, and the only reason I say you might look for him is because they may be behind by a lot and have to throw the ball. And then you also may look at Hawkins from Cincinnati. He's actually a big play guy. It's a crapshoot, but he can get you anywhere from 10 to 15 points in 2 plays. Thanks for joining us in Week 6. As you look forward into Week 7 in your leagues, and you see that you may have some matchups that you have a question about and some players you may have a question about as well, who better to ask than the professor? Post a question in our comment box right down below, and we'll answer it in next week's matchup show. Until then, like this video, subscribe to our channel for weekly updates, and make sure you follow us on Twitter. Make sure you tune in next week where I'll show you how to make a fantastic reusable shopping bag out of a pair of old tennis shoes.